Kia ora, welcome to Under the Checkered Flag, MotoGP edition. I'm your host Kate, and we're just going to jump right in. This weekend, we were in San Marino. So, it was a very, very interesting weekend, and one that I think that is actually quite remarkable owing to the fact that I don't know if this is the first sprint, it may not be, but we had all the riders finish, which I think at this stage is a very remarkable achievement, especially considering we had 25 riders on the grid because we had 3 wildcards. We had wildcards from each KTM, Honda and Ducati, so it was just incredible. The racing wasn't overly exciting on the Saturday, but it was still definitely worth a watch, and I'm sure you all know, but I absolutely adore having Dani Pedrosa on the grid. I get some real nostalgic vibes, and he's just so talented, and it shows that back in the day he really could play with the Fantastic Four. There's a reason it's called that. There's a reason that we consider Dani Pedrosa an alien. Yes, he didn't win a Premier title, but he's got 3 titles. He's got 3 world championships, and he is an absolutely incredibly talented individual. And I think it was one of the biggest mistakes Honda will ever have made in not retaining Dani as a test rider. And it's one of the smartest things that KTM have done in having Dani as a test rider, because we cannot ignore how good that KTM is and how good Dani Pedrosa is. I mean, for goodness sakes, this is only like his 3rd MotoGP race since he retired in 2018, and he was so close to a podium on that Saturday. He was so quick. He was, only denied it by some absolutely beautiful defending from the person in front of him, and Brad Binder was definitely pushing him as hard as he could to try and overtake him. But alas, I have jumped ahead of myself. We always should be starting with Moto3. Moto3 proved yet again why it is such an incredible championship. We came down to the last lap, and we had a 3-way fight for the win. We had Discord server favourite Denise Onchu. When I say Discord server, I just mean Pozza, because there's so many fans of so many different riders in there. But we had Pozza's favourite, Denise Onchu. We had Jamie Massier, and we had David Alonso. And there's just something about these 3. They have such different riding styles. They're all incredibly talented in their own way. And it's just so good to see these last lap battles. Basically what happened in the end was a couple of corners, possibly even the last corner. Massier, Denise and Alonso are all bunched up together. Massier he doesn't push Denise wide, but he does a very defensive manoeuvre. And it's like your through goes Hamilton moment in Formula 1. We've seen Miguel Oliveira do this in MotoGP. I'm pretty sure we've seen Brad Binder do it as well. When the 2 people in front are having a scrap, you just wait them out and then you cut up the inside. And that is exactly what David Alonso did. And it was an absolutely stunning move from the Colombian. And just a few months back, I say a few months, it was probably just before the summer break, whenever he won his first race, it was like, oh my gosh, we've got the Colombian national anthem, we haven't heard this in ages. Practically, at this point, we'll all know the words by the end of the season, because he's just showing that much raw talent. And let's not forget, this kid is 17. He is only 17 years old, and he is showing such patience and such determination on the grid. And not only is he 17, he's a rookie. This is his first season in Moto3, and he is taking it to the more experienced riders like Denise Onchu and all of the riders that have been on the grid for so long. And he's just like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. I'm just going to pass you here, don't mind me. I'm just going to take this win. And then, after he does that, and his adrenaline's no doubt pumping, he's such a class act in his interviews. He's such a class act on the podium. He's like a cross between Marc Marquez and Dani Pedrosa. I am just so excited to see how he develops, and I really can't wait to see his potential future, which is definitely there, because he could easily be a dominating force in all three engine sizes of the World Championship. And so I'm just very excited to see David Alonso's future. On to Moto2, and we saw some absolute masterclass saves from Vietti this weekend. Seriously, he was pushing so hard. No doubt it's because his home race, but wow, we must have seen 4 or 5 different saves. How he managed to stay on that bike, I honestly don't know. It was just absolutely incredible and shows the absolute talent on this grid. The good news for a lot of people is that Tony Arbolino showed some form. Now, he's had a really rough few weeks, not been on the pace. I mean, he finished P17. He's really been down in form, which has been absolutely devastating for the title fight and for his hopes to move up into MotoGP next year. Fortunately, today, he ended up in P4. I know it's outside of the podium, but seriously, it was so good to see him back up there and on the pace. He was putting in really good laps. His best lap was actually better than that of Alonso, who finished in P3, and I suppose it just gave me a bit of hope that we'll see some more spice in this championship. The reason I say that is because on the podium, we had in P3 Alonso Lopez. In P2, we had I'm going to butcher this, I'm so sorry. I will really work on it. Celestino Vietti. And in P1, we had Pedro Acosta. Now, this race was demolished by Pedro Acosta. He showed why he's leading the championship. He showed why he's going up to MotoGP, because we can't keep him in Moto2, because he's just going to dominate so many races. I think we're quite fortunate that he did make a mistake earlier in the year, and that we do have this spicy championship fight of there's a possibility that he could be beaten. That's the level of domination that Pedro Acosta is showing in Moto2. We're hoping for some spice. We're hoping for a minor mechanical failure. We're hoping for a minor mechanical failure that can be easily fixed for the next race, but just so that, say, Tony Arbolino can win that race and claw 25 points to keep this championship alive. But let's be real, Acosta's just that quick. He's really talented, and it will be really interesting to see him move up to MotoGP, and it'll just be really good to see the championship not be ran away with in Moto2, because I, like I'm sure many of you listening, much prefer a battle. I want to see some spice. And while we're on that topic, we're just going to go straight into the sprint race in MotoGP, because wow, that has actually sort of spiced things up, because we all saw last week that Pecco Bagnaia took a nasty fall. He had a very violent high side, which is very rare for Ducati. He then got struck in the legs by Brad Binder. It was a really scary moment. Fortunately, he's okay, and it also now has this side effect that he's not overly fit for this week, because we're having a back-to-back double header. And that means that the person next in line for the championship, Jorge Martins, has an incredible opportunity here. And that opportunity he did not squander in any way, shape or form on the Saturday, because he set an absolute beauty of a lap record. If you haven't seen that lap, seriously, go on YouTube. It's on the It's on the MotoGP main channel. It's his entire lap. just watch the way he throws himself around on that bike. It is truly incredible. But he breaks the lap record. He then goes on and absolutely demolishes in the sprint. I say this, he just performed really, really strongly. It was so good to see. But let's get to the whole podium and a few other notable mentions in the MotoGP sprint. And our first notable mention has to be Dani Pedrosa. Seriously, the hype train that follows Dani Pedrosa everywhere. I am so here for it. I absolutely adore it. I adore Dani Pedrosa. He's just so wholesome, and he just seems like a really shy but really sweet character, and I love seeing him in the paddock. Honda's big mistake, yes, but alas, I think that just having him on the grid, having him as a wild card, and then having him score P4 in the sprint is an absolute masterclass of Magic Crew. But back to the MotoGP sprint, Brad Binder was so aggressive, and it was really, really cool to see. And I really, really enjoyed seeing this side of him. So he had to do it because he had to make up some places, and yeah, it's just nice to see the riders when they're not too afraid of getting their shoulders and knees out, basically. True Marc Marquez style, but without too much nerfing, I suppose. So we had Brad Binder in P5 and Dani Pedrosa in P4. In P3, we had the injured Pecco Bagnaia to be incredibly talented enough and incredibly passionate enough to get back on that bike after he did get struck while on the ground by another rider. Not only to get back on that bike, but to perform so strongly enough to get a podium. It's honestly truly incredible, and yeah, it's just wow, I cannot be more impressed. In fact, the only person I could be more impressed with was who was in P2 in the sprint, and that is Marco Bezzecchi. Now, Marco Bezzecchi last week was involved in that Turn 1 incident with Enea Bastianini and a number of other riders, so Marco Bezzecchi does have fractures. He's got a very injured hand and his foot as well. Enea's still sitting out because he also has broken bones, but Marco Bezzecchi finished in P2 while he's got a bandaged hand, and it is swollen, it is painful, and he's still in P2. The things these guys are made of. In P1 was Jorge Martins, who had his absolute injury moment earlier in the year when he still raced with a broken foot. Seriously, I seriously can't comprehend it. It's truly something to behold watching these guys on a bike. But yes, Jorge Martins, absolute beauty of a Saturday for him. So he had that record-breaking qualifying, then he performed so strongly in the sprint. It's really nice to see him sort of coming into his own and coming on to the weekend, knowing that you can keep your eyes on him to perform. He does seem to be more consistent, he does seem to be more comfortable, and he does have so much more confidence on that bike now. And I'm really, really happy that he's finding his form, because I did worry that when he got turned down or passed over by Enea Bastianini for that factory slot, that he could fall into a bit of a rut and totally lose all his performance. But I'm very, very happy that that hasn't happened, because I think that Jorge Martins is incredibly talented. As I just said, I quite enjoy the aggressive style of the riders. I know that Jorge Martins' aggressive style is probably a bit too much for a lot of people, but I'm also a fan of Brad Binder. I'm also a fan of Marc Marquez. I find rubbing his racing to be part of it, as long as you still have respect to your riders. And we definitely see that with Jorge Martins. He definitely cares about his riders. And he definitely admires all the other people on the grid with him. And so I just really enjoy the fact that he is also performing so strongly. It's really good to see, and I just really enjoyed Saturday. I highly recommend all this racing, to be fair. Moto3 was an absolute banger. Moto2, absolute banger. MotoGP sprint race, also a banger. So I'm going to have to touch on the rumours. So everywhere this weekend, including many reputable news outlets such as Speedweek, and they're the only ones coming to mind as a reputable news outlet right now. Oh, my brain is absolutely frazzled. In my defense, it's very early in the morning when I'm recording this. Normally I have the day off straight after MotoGP so that I can record this without being completely sleep deprived. But here I am. Anyway, I digress. Yes, the hot rumour all around the paddock that if you're a MotoGP fan, I'm sure you have not missed, is that Marc Marquez may be going to Gresini next year. Now, I'm in two minds. I think, number one, he could just yeet himself out of Honda, hop on the Gresini and start performing strongly. I do think that Marc is still in incredible form. I don't know if he's going to win another world championship, but he is incredible on a bike. Just looking at where he is compared to those other Hondas should say it all, really. But I don't actually think he's going to go, at least not in 2024. My reasoning for this is I don't think he's an absolute dickhead. And the way he's been acting on social media, if he is leaving, that's a dickhead move. Now, no matter what you think about Marc or, his riding style or anything like that, he does seem like a guy who looks after his core group, including his brother, and that'll include so many members of his team. And he does have a loyalty to Honda that I don't think he's going to break by splashing clickbait articles all over social media. I don't think that's going to happen. So I do think that in 2024, Marc Marquez is still going to be riding for Repsol Honda. In 2025, though, I think that given the fact that KTM may be looking at a Binder Acosta factory lineup, I think that there's a possibility that we see Marc Marquez on a Gresini KTM, because it makes a lot of sense. He'd take the Red Bull sponsorship with him. KTM want an extra satellite team. KTM were not going to say no to Marc Marquez if he comes knocking and not asking for a lot of money. I could see it happening. I, for one, think it's a great idea. While I would absolutely adore another Yamaha satellite, say we get, an extra 2 teams, and that becomes a Yamaha satellite team. I want to say MT Racing, but I'm sure Lily's going to yell at me for even saying Yamaha and MT Racing in the same sentence. But then we'd have 4 Yamahas, 4 Hondas, 4 Aprilias, 6 KTM, and 8 Ducatis. No, it would be 6 Ducatis. Oh, I really do like this idea. Let's do this. It's not a perfect idea because we'd all like 4 bikes for each manufacturer, but while we're not probably going to get a manufacturer until 2027, let's do this instead. At least I'd really like it, just because I don't like seeing Marquez on that Honda. And on that note, can Mir go to RNF Aprilia or something once Alicia leaves? Please? Please someone give Mir a ride after that Honda run, because I cannot... For my sanity, I do not want to see Mir's MotoGP career end like this. He's a world champion, for goodness sakes. He's an incredibly talented rider. That Honda's just absolute horseshit. Excuse the language, but my gosh. I think we're lucky that no one's died on it this year, to be honest. But alas, minor rant and slight tangent over. On to the main one. We're moving over to the Sunday race for MotoGP. So let's start with Brad Binder. Wow. Can we just say that this guy crashed out, and it was a quick crash, turn 14, a low side fortunately, so he crashed out, but still managed to get back on the bike, finish the race, and score points. Absolute legend. He was battling for P4 when he crashed out. No, my apologies. He was battling for P3 when he crashed out. And what could have been is absolutely incredible. I firmly believe that if he'd managed to stay on that bike, he would have been on the podium. So I'm very, very gutted for Brad that he wasn't able to do that, because it would have been so cool to see. Because I just think Brad's such a class act. To be fair, I think the majority of the riders are. But I just really like to see someone other than Ducati, mainly a KTM, on the podium, just because it shows how much of a step forward they've made. Because let's not forget, at the start of the year, after testing, everyone was just straight writing them off. They performed horrifically in testing. Everyone was like, oh my gosh, they're going to be a disaster. And then bam, they are performing so strongly. Even though he crashed out, it showed that he had so much potential, so much pace, and yeah, I'm just really glad he still managed to score points. So, other notable mentions from the weekend is going to be Marc Marquez, because wow, while the rest of the Hondas were really low down, or bless his soul, Joan Mir had another horror of a race by DNFing. Joan Mir, I just really want him off that Honda, eh? Anyway, I've already talked about that. But Taka Nakagami came P19, Stefan Bradl came P18, and so then we had Marc Marquez being, I guess, the alien that he is. Possibly the last alien. He's in P7. It just shows how utterly talented he is. He was in a Aprilia, an R&F Aprilia sandwich, because Raul Fernandez, P8, very, very impressive, and it's good to see him up there. It's good to see him with some serious pace. Hopefully this form keeps up and we get to keep him in MotoGP next year, because I feel like now he's part of that Aprilia family. He's really showing some excellent potential, and so I'd just like to explore that a bit more and see truly what he can bring to Aprilia. On the other side of that sandwich was Miguel Oliveira, P6, some nice clean overtakes. In the Discord group, we had a lot of good banter because it was Mark versus Miguel, and we all remember Portimao. While that's not funny, we're getting to the point of year where we can sort of just say, fucking hell, that was pretty rough to watch. But now, Ollie's back on the pace. Mark's not wrecking himself every weekend and actually seems to have a bit more control over that Honda. I'm not saying he has control. I'm saying he has a bit more control over it, because I don't think anyone can control that Honda at the moment. So there was 6, 7, and 8. In P5, we had Maverick Vinales. Now, a lot of people did peg him for the win this weekend. He performed strongly here, but for some reason, this track and the Aprilia just really didn't seem to gel, which is a shame, because it would have been so good to see him getting his third manufacturer win, basically. So hopefully we still get to see that soon, and we will get to see Maverick getting that third win for that third manufacturer and making history. In P4, Danny Pedrosa. So it was exactly the same feeling and vibes as the sprint. You're like, yes, I really want Danny on the podium, but then Pecco's right there as well, and you're like, dang, Pecco was injured and putting on a hell of a performance, but Danny Pedrosa, oh, do it for the nostalgic vibes. But after the race, we saw Pecco in P3, we saw him in Park Firm, and my gosh, was he exhausted. You could see it. The guy was absolutely cooked. He gave it his absolute all this weekend, and given how injured he was, I've really got to give props to the guy, because, yeah, truly, truly incredible, and, I just respect it so much. Again, in P2, Marco Bezzecchi, also incredibly, incredibly injured, could hardly hold the flag up when he was celebrating, And again, it gives him more points over Pecco. It means he stays in that championship fight. It's a really big bonus for him and VR46, because it still shows that, you know, they're still in it even though they're on year-old machinery. They've still got a chance of battling at the front, battling in this championship. They're right up there with the factory guys, and that's really, really cool to see. So, massive props to Dani Pedrosa, Pecco Bagnaia and Marco Bezzecchi. But they weren't on the top spot. Who was on the top spot? It was Jorge Martin. He did the double. He just, I'm not going to say ran away with it. There were definitely times in the race where it did look like he'd run away with it. He was a couple of seconds in front. It was incredible. But in the end, he only won by 1.35 seconds, which is still quite a margin. But it was just incredible. An absolute great weekend for him. I think Pecco Bagnaia is going to be quite glad that he did some serious damage limitation as to how much he lost, because let's not forget, a week ago he was in a hospital bed and didn't know if he was going to be racing this weekend. So only losing, what was it, around 10 points to Jorge Martin this weekend, I think that's going to be a big win. It does mean that Jorge Martin's up there in the championship fight. There's a lot more chance that now we're actually going to have a championship fight, which I think is great. I think it's great for the championship. Obviously, I do not wish it had come about this particular way, but it'll just be really, really interesting to see how this dynamic sort of develops over the next few weeks, and it'll be really interesting to see them battle in 2 weeks' time in India, provided India happens. We're still sort of on the fence. We don't know if the riders are going to accept the safety. We don't know if the riders should accept the safety in India. That's a whole different ballgame, which I'll probably touch in the pod next week, just because it's more, it could be a lengthy pod, so that's why I'm considering splitting it into those two parts, because I know when it comes to rider safety that we could go on these tangents and I could end up ranting about how the riders should be unionised and things. But it'll be interesting to see them battle it out in a couple of weeks' time. The fact the next race is only in a couple of weeks' time is really, I suppose, a bit worrying for Pecco. Because, like I said, he's seriously injured. Yes, it's only bruising, contusions, hematomas, but quite often they can be a lot worse to deal with, because they take so long to heal. And the fact he's just gone out there this weekend and has just given it his all, he's pushed and pushed and pushed so hard to get really strong performances and stay in that championship, stay in that fight and really try and cling on to that world championship title. It just shows how passionate he is about it. And so the fact we've only got a 2-week break before we're at the Buddha International Circuit, I do think it's a double header again. I don't think it's one of the triple headers, but yeah, it shows that with this calendar, literally anything can happen, because they're all so close together, and it's just utterly bonkers to me how we had this big gap. In fact, we basically had a miniature summer break and then a long summer break. And now we're just like back to back, so many races, and it just shows that if a rider does get injured, everything changes. Fortunately, Pecco did manage to pull through and get on the podium this weekend. I'm sorry, the it just can't be stopped. I'm a MotoGP fan. We hear the commentators alliterate constantly, so I must do it. But alas, I think this will be where I'll be calling it for this week. What a weekend. San Marino did not disappoint. It was a wonderful weekend. Thank you all. As always, thank you all so much for listening. This coming week, we do have MotoGP testing, so all eyes are going to be on Honda and Yamaha specifically. The Japanese manufacturers, because they have so much riding on this test, we need to see some serious steps forward. So I will be back here this time next week, possibly sooner, because I'm thinking of doing 2 shows a week. But definitely I'll be back here this time next week to do a full breakdown of absolutely everything that I can find from the MotoGP testing. So definitely watch this space, because I'm so excited. I'm so hopeful for Honda. I'm so hopeful for Yamaha, because I want to see as many bikes being competitive as possible. I want to see as many manufacturers being competitive as possible, because that's some of the fun of having a world championship. So, have a great weekend, have a great week, and I will see you again. Like and subscribe if you like it. Bye!